Okay, so since the other recording didn't capture all of the code, I'm going to do this one more time with actually just showing the code, the changes that we make as we go. So reference the other one for all the nice discussions that we had, and this one for the code, I guess. So yeah, we're going to start by pulling out a child component here to handle the editing of the survey title. I'm going to call it survey title. Sorry, I guess I meant I wanted to cut that. So survey title is going to be the name of the component. Just put that there. Let's make a new file. It's not going to work necessarily. Nothing's going to work until we finish everything, but we can do this step by step. So survey title.view, here we go. It's got a template, and I'm going to paste the stuff in from before. It's got a script, and that's good. So then in the survey builder, got survey title here. I'm going to I'm going to import it. So from both of those, survey title, and then reference it in the components list, which isn't a list but an object, so that you know about the title or the name of the variable too. So yep, survey title there, and survey title here. Now, of course, we need to pass down the prop that we were caring about. Passing down the prop title, going to make that bound with the colon, right, so that it's actually evaluating title here against local data, and passing that in. So here's title. It doesn't show up yet because we need to register that we're expecting a prop by the name of title. So when we do that, everything shows up like normal. Now that is we've successfully extracted a subcomponent survey title. Now the reason we've got that is because it's going to have its own local state. It's going to be able to switch back and forth between editing and not editing mode. So we're going to add a data function here that returns base defaults for the data. Editing is going to default to false, and so now that is defaulted to false. We have to respond to something. We have to do something with that in the template. I'm going to wrap the whole thing in a div so that we don't need to worry about having multiple routes to our template here. And the h1 is going to only show up if we are not editing. So the if not editing, and that's an h1. That's going to switch back and forth with an input, or maybe a label actually, just for semantic reasons. Here's a label. We're gonna call it title, and nope, not that, like this, title, and we're gonna put in it an input with type text, and bound value of title. So that's just going to show up like this. If we want it to actually alternate with the h1, we do the else, and there we go. Now, of course, we don't have a way to change the editing yet, but just to prove that it works, if we change editing down there, it changes up there. So got to be a little test-driven, even if they're not automated tests, right? Just so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves with a mistake that we didn't know we were making. Cool. So now I want to add a button. Here's a button. It's going to be the type of button, so that it doesn't actually load the page. And inside of it, I'm going to say edit, just to get that on the screen. There's a button, doesn't do anything yet. So we're going to @click. Is short for @on, remember, so @on click. We're going to have something, maybe we're going to call it toggle editing. That makes some sense. So down here in methods, right, we're going to put a toggle editing function, and what it's going to do is just say this.editing equals the opposite of this.editing. So now when we click it, we switch back and forth between the h1 and the title. Now, of course, the button shouldn't say edit when we're in the middle of editing. It should probably say save, right? We could just interpolate a bunch of JavaScript right here in between the handlebars. But rather than doing that, let's use a computed property. That's sort of the right idea, I feel like. Computed properties, of course, are it's for asking questions of your component that are general to the whole component, and based on the data, computed properties are cached so that every time the data changes, you don't need, that's the only time that you need to recalculate the component. It's not every single time you render, right? You could imagine if it's a really expensive computation that if you were using a method just to return the value, then you'd end up having to do a bunch of extra calculation, even when the data hasn't changed, right? So computed property, that's exactly what this is for. It also lets us give it a name. Names are great. Let's call it edit button text. And so then down here, we are going to add a list of computed properties, or an object of computed properties. And this is going to be called edit button text. And it's a function that's going to return the results of a nice little ternary, this.editing, question mark, save, :edit. Cool. So now when we click it, button text changes, all is well. So we have succeeded in pulling out a little component, child component here, to deal with the survey title, but of course there's the question of actually hooking it up so that when you change the contents, it actually changes the data in the top level component. The weird thing about Vue is that it will let you change this right here. That's possible to, that's changing, sure, but what that's actually changing is the local state of the input element, and that's not changing the data stored in Survey Builder. So in order to help us understand what's actually going on up here, I'm just going to put in a little bit of temporary display of the title, like that. Just want to see it, right? So there's the title. Now we can keep track, and we can see that as we're changing this, the title that is known to Survey Builder doesn't change. Right? It's only changing local state. And we need to make sure that those changes are propagated up to this top level state so that when we submit the survey after we've built it, the title can be included as it should be. Right? So that means we got to hook up this input here and make sure that it is that we're listening for its changes, right? So just like we do with button here with on click, we're going to do on input for the input, and we're going to give it a handler called I don't know, handle change or something. That's probably fine. So handle change can be a method over here, so we'll go and write it. Handle change. Handle change takes an event. And what we're going to do is a little bit of Vue magic, this dot emit. Right? So emit is how we can create an event and bubble it up to our parent, our parents and our grandparents as a component, right? And we can call this event anything that we want to call it. If it were really specific, we're doing something that nobody's ever done before, we might come up with a nice name. You want to use kebab case. So hyphens, it could be change title, something like that. But since it really is similar to what is happening with the input here, right? It's as somebody inputs anything. Let's just use the name input to be consistent with the web standards, right? So we're gonna emit an input event, and we're gonna pass as the value of that event this.target.value, or sorry, e.target.value, right? Which is just the standard old JavaScript way of getting the value from the input that triggered the input event. Cool. So that is propagating now, but we're not listening for it in the Survey Builder. So we're going to go and listen for it in the Survey Builder. We're going to go here and we're going to say on input, and make a method here that's called maybe something like update title. Right, so now we have to implement that method. So down here under components, under data, use a comma, and do methods. And we called it handle, or what was it? Update title. Update title. Update title is a method that takes a value, and what we do is we say this.title equals value. That's exactly right, right? So now if we change this, okay, I think I might have to refresh. Let's see if that does it. Now if we change this, cool. It's updating the title stored in the top level state, and that's good. So we have a value, here's the title, we have an on input handle change. You're going to be doing that a lot, and there's a way that you'll see people do shorthand that Vue offers to do that sort of, here's the value, tell me when it changes, and I'll handle it by setting my local value, and that's vModel, right? So you can say that this input is modeled by a piece of data, right? And so what we could do, we could say vModel equals something like title, right? And that would almost work, except for what's happening is that instead of handle change, what we're doing down here, we're emitting an input event, right? What that's actually going to do is change the props title, and that'll freak out. It does not like it when you change the props. Oh, also I broke everything in the display over there. Why did that happen? If I delete that, does it fix it? Yeah, okay, so it just doesn't, it's not compatible with all of the other stuff. But this isn't quite what we want to do anyway, because we want to actually emit an event and not just update a prop which you can't change anyway. So let's make a local value here, which is what you tend to call it when you're putting it in place, just to be the local mirror that you can change. And the local value, we're going to say, it's going to default to this .title. Right, so now we're at the situation where we've got it like this again, refreshing just to show. We've got it like this again, but hey, we broke the connection because we're not actually doing the emitting anymore. Now we can emit every time local value is changed by adding a watcher. So I'm going to say watch, and in here we're going to register a watcher for local value, and the watcher is a function that takes a new value and does something with it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to emit an input event with the new value. Right, so that adds it back so that it changes, or so that it does emit every time we change something, and we can prove to ourselves that it works like this. Cool. Crossing the bridge of death, and it updates as we type. And it doesn't seem like maybe all that much of a win here, because we still had to add the watcher versus having to, it's like you're still kind of adding stuff, right? The real savings come into play when you've got complex forms, right? In this case, we really do just have a piece of text. But down here when we're doing questions, right, when we're changing a question is composed of a text, a type, and a list of options. And to have basically, here's your text, and when I change the text, or when text changes, I want to do this. And here's the type, and when the type changes, I want to do this. And having all of that, in having to write all of that, you start to appreciate being able to maybe say vModel question. So we are then going to basically make our survey title stand in properly for an input, and we can also use vModel up here in the survey title component, and not have to write the update title method and not have to keep track of all of that, and have it be super clear, because what the vModel is for is components that directly allow the user to change some piece of data. And you always want them to display the data as it exists until the user changes it, and then you want to change the data, right? So it simulates two-way binding. So we want to be able to say vModel equals title right there and have that be just fine. And it's almost just fine, except for right now we're not getting the value of the title, and that's because vModel expects a prop called value and to receive events called input. And so it's just a matter of taking title here and changing it to value, and taking title here and changing it to value, and taking title here and changing it to value. And now we're back in business. The whole thing connected, and all we have to say up here is vModel title. right? Again, title is just a piece of text, so it's not the biggest win, but for a survey question, right, you can totally see how being able to say just abstract all of the complexity of what data is involved in this complex piece of thing, you know, or for a date picker, right? It's exactly the same kind of thing. You don't want to have to worry about how the date picker works and whether it's, you know, showing month view or week view or whatever on the level of your form. You just want to be able to say, here's a date, tell me when the user wants it to be a different date, right? And that's what vModel is perfect for. Yeah, so since we're doing that, we also don't need this method down here anymore, which cleans that up a good bit. And on the other video, there's a nice discussion of why you might not always want to use vModel. It hides the complexity in a way that sometimes can be nice, but especially if you're using it for something other than directly modeling a piece of data, you know, it can be maybe more confusing than it's worth. So anyway, yeah, that's what I got, and I think it's nice. Let's move along and do survey question, at least the beginning part of it, adding an edit mode and getting to the UI of having the fields that we need. So just a reminder, this is the way we want a survey question to look when in edit mode, right? Here's not edit mode, here's edit mode. You want it to be a label and an input here for text, label and a select here for options, or for type, and a label and multiple options here for the different options, and we're eventually going to add option button. And so just let's, so this is the one. In survey question, we're going to do like we just did, and we're going to add a piece of data, which is going to be called editing. Again, that has to be a function that returns the default, and the default is editing false. And just getting my formatting all good. Boom, 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 editing false. Okay. Trailing comma. Cool. So then we want to switch back and forth. We want to alternate the UI. So I'm going to wrap all of this here in a div so that I don't need to worry about what's going on in there. And say that that's only visible if we are not editing. And then for the alternate, let's use a field set. Let's use a form. Form going to be the else on this guy. We'll deal with all of the what happens when the user submits it later when we're actually hooking this up. But basically, in order to be able to see this, I want to set that to true for now. So we can see what we're doing as we go. Let's add a label with text and an input bound to, or with value bound to question.text. And I guess I should probably put a type text in there. And then close the label tag, and that should show. Cool, that shows up. Another label with that says type and contains within it a select. So you bind the value on the top level of the select so that you can know, so that you know that it's set correctly. This is going to be question.type. But then you do have to put the options inside. So option, and of course we're just going to type these. In, but you, I'm sure, can see that you might want to refactor here eventually. In fact, we will, but not yet. Let's just get it on the screen. Options. Pick any number. Gotta be careful to get them right. This is why you'd want to abstract, is so that Typos aren't a big deal. Short answer. Of course, those need to be letter for letter the same as what our values will be. And refreshing the page just so that it all shows up. Cool, we got a text, type, and the type is reflecting what the type is from the other, from the data. So then for the options, let's use a field set with a legend for options. And then we're going to have in here a number of inputs. We're in fact going to loop on the inputs for option in question dot options, and we're going to bind the value to option. And if I give it a type text, then the styling comes into play. Type text. Cool. So now those are there. But there's a little bit of an issue still because those are there even for short answer questions that don't have options, and that's not quite right. So we already have this computed property for has options, so we will just add to it, we'll say the if has options. And now that only shows up if we have options. Of course, that looks pretty awful, so let me just really quickly throw a class on here and remind you guys that we can use style, and we can scope the style, so we don't need to worry about that class name being universal. And then I can say something like a I don't know, border 1 pix solid gray, and or margin bottom of 1em. That should do it, right? Some amount of padding too would make that look better, and then we can all be happy. Padding. Only on the sides. Cool. So that's basically that. We will get to the point where all of these are hooked up and functional, starting again from the explicit event-based way of doing it, and moving into the V model, so you can see how big of a win that is. But yeah, basically there we go. That's where I'm going to stop because that's what we did in the other video in 3 times as much time. But that's because there were really good discussions. I'll try to post some timestamps to the good ones. So yeah, there you go.